Close your eyes. Outside, the evening mist is curling around the cold iron of Whispering Gate, silencing the world. But step inside the old post office and leave the chill behind. Breathe in the comforting scent of wood smoke, sweet apple cider, and melting crimson wax. Listen to the heavy, soothing rustle of thick parchment and the slow, hypnotic ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Every letter is sorted. The day is done. You are safe here. Let the warmth settle over you. It is time to rest. Part 1. Arrival at Whispering Gate. The road had been long. Not long in any way that troubled the bones, though the bones had their own quiet complaints by now, but long in the way that all roads become long when the light begins to leave them. When the hedgerows lose their color and soften into silhouette. When the world narrows gently, the way a river narrows before it finds its estuary, and everything around you seems to lean inward, pressing softly, the way a heavy blanket presses when you pull it up around your shoulders in the very first moments of evening. The traveler had come from somewhere far enough away that it no longer mattered where. Distance, by that hour, had dissolved. The journey was simply the journey, a series of slow turns, each one leading to the next with a kind of unhurried inevitability, like the pages of a book that turns itself. And then, through the mist, the gate appeared. It was wrought iron, old and dark and beautiful, set between two stone pillars that had stood long enough to gather their own small ecosystems of lichen and moss. Soft, gray-green cushions pressed into the crevices as if the stone itself had grown comfortable and settled in for the night. The gate was tall but not imposing. It had that quality that very old things sometimes carry, a kind of patient grandeur, worn smooth at the edges, that invites rather than warns. Across its arch, letters had been worked into the iron itself, curling, unhurried letters, the kind a craftsman makes when he is in no hurry and takes genuine pleasure in his work. Whispering Gate, they read, and beneath them, in smaller script, a phrase so faded as to be nearly invisible. All letters, welcome here. The traveler paused before it. The gate was open, just slightly, just enough, and through the gap came a breath of air that carried something remarkable. Not a smell exactly, or not only a smell, something more diffuse than that. The scent of old stone and cool evening and damp earth. Yes, but beneath those things, something else entirely. The faint, sweet ghost of wood smoke, and beneath that, so subtle it might have been imagined, the clean, dry whisper of old paper. It was the scent, the traveler would later think, of a place that had been quietly minding its own business for a very long time. The village announced itself slowly. A cobblestone lane curved gently away from the gate, its stones worn smooth and slightly uneven underfoot, the kind of surface that asks you to pay attention, to feel each step. On either side, ancient trees stood close, oaks and elms whose roots had long ago lifted and resettled the cobblestones nearest their trunks, so that the lane seemed to breathe, to ripple, as if it were alive and sleeping. The trees were whispering. That is not a fanciful thing to say. The wind through Whispering Gate moved differently than wind moved elsewhere. Or perhaps it was simply that the leaves here were older and more numerous and arranged by decades of growth into something very like a natural instrument. Whatever the reason, the sound they made was extraordinary. A soft, continuous susurrus, not quite a rustle, and not quite a sigh, but something in between. A sound that had no hard edges in it anywhere. A sound that seemed designed to slow the breath and still the mind. The traveler walked slowly, listening. A house here, a house there, curtains lit from within, warm amber pressing through the glass, a cat on a windowsill, watching with a calm authority that cats bring to observation. A wreath of dried herbs above a door, a garden gate latched with something climbing over it in happy disorder. Climbing roses, perhaps, though in the twilight it was difficult to say. The village was small, and in its smallness, it was complete. From somewhere behind and above, from the direction of the main lane it seemed, though the mist made direction uncertain, came a sound, low and rhythmic, growing gradually, then peaking, then receding, the sound of hooves on cobblestone. The traveler stopped. Through the mist, a shape resolved, a horse-drawn mail carriage, moving at a steady walk, its lamps lit and swinging softly with each step of the horse. It was a beautiful thing, dark lacquered wood, iron-rimmed wheels turning with a low hum over the stones, a stack of leather satchels roped to the luggage board at the back. The horse was a gray, heavy-set and calm, its breath coming in slow plumes in the cool air. The driver sat high on the box, bundled in a coat of dark wool, a hat pulled low. He did not hurry. He did not need to. The horse knew its route, and the route was the route it had always been, and there was no urgency in any of it. The carriage passed. The sound of hooves faded into the mist, slow, slow, slower, like the ticking of a clock winding down, until there was nothing left of it but the echo. And then not even that, just the trees again, whispering, just the cool air, just the soft, damp quiet of a village settling into evening. And then the traveler saw the light. It fell from a window, not a large window, but a generous one, its glass slightly uneven in the way of old glass, so that the light that came through it moved a little, shimmered a little, as if alive. The light was amber, not yellow, not orange, but that particular amber that comes from oil lamps with good wicks and warm glass, a color that seems to contain within it some memory of fire and warmth and long evenings indoors. It fell onto the cobblestones in a long, soft rectangle, and the damp stones caught it and held it, gleaming. Above the door, a sign hung from a short iron bracket, swinging very gently in the evening air. The sign was wooden, old wood, painted and repainted many times over, so that the layers showed at the edges, and upon it, in careful gold lettering that had faded just enough to feel entirely right, were the words Whispering Gate Post Office, and below that, Est, 1847. The sign swung. It made no sound. The traveler stood for a moment on the cobblestones, looking at the door. It was a good door, a proper door, with a brass handle worn smooth by generations of hands, and a small window in its upper half through which the amber light fell in a warm rectangle onto the step outside. The step itself was stone, slightly hollowed in the center from long use, and that hollow seemed to the traveler perhaps fanciful, perhaps not, like a kind of welcome, like the place where welcome lives, worn into the world by repetition. A breath, a step forward. The door opened with a sound that was barely a sound at all, just the soft compression of warm air against cool, the faint whisper of old hinges, the quietest possible announcement of an arrival. Inside, the world changed. It changed slowly, the way warmth changes things. Gradually, from the outside in, the cold of the evening fell away first from the face, then from the hands, then from the chest, until the whole body had adjusted and settled into the ambient warmth of the room the way a stone settles into riverbed. The room was not large, but it was full. Floor to ceiling on the left-hand wall ran wooden pigeonholes, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, arranged in a grid so precise and yet so gently aged that they seemed to have grown there rather than been constructed. Each pigeonhole was a small dark square of shadow, and in each shadow, nested letters, folded paper and sealed envelopes, fat parcels and thin notes, everything waiting with the particular patience of correspondence. On the right, shelves bore their own orderly burdens, leather-bound books with labels on their spines, stacks of brown parcel paper tied with twine, brass instruments of measurement and impression, bottles of ink in dark glass, a set of scales, a rack of rubber stamps, everything in its place, everything tended. The scent of the room was extraordinary. It was the smell of old paper, not musty, not stale, but rich and dry, the way antique bookshops smell, the way the inside of a cedar chest smells, with something deeper beneath it, leather, much used and well-conditioned, wood smoke from the small fireplace in the corner, where a fire had been going long enough to have settled into contentment, and something else, fainter. That might have been wax, or might have been ink, or might simply have been the accumulated history of 1,000 letters passing through this room. Over more than a century, the traveler breathed it in. Behind the long wooden counter, bent over a stack of envelopes, arranged in careful rows, was a man. He was elderly, not frail, but properly old, the kind of old that carries its weight easily, that has learned over many decades not to hurry and has found that unhurrying suits it well. He wore a woolen vest over a white shirt, the vest a rich navy with small buttons that caught the lamplight. His spectacles sat slightly low on his nose, not slipping, but settled there as if they had found their position long ago and saw no reason to move. His hair was white and combed, his hands steady and precise over the envelopes. He was sorting. Not quickly. There was no speed in what he did, only accuracy. He would take an envelope from the stack, hold it a moment, read the address with the attention of someone who genuinely cared where it was going, and then place it with soft finality into the correct pigeonhole behind him. The sound this made, the dry whisper of paper against wood, was repeated every few seconds, steadily, like the clicking of the clock on the mantelpiece above the fire. He looked up. His eyes behind the spectacles were a warm gray blue, the color of the sky on a morning when the weather cannot quite decide. They carried without effort the unmistakable expression of a person who is genuinely glad to see another person. "Ah," he said, just that, quietly, as if the traveler's arrival had been not unexpected, not exactly, but simply right, as if the evening had been waiting for this moment and was now settling into its proper shape. "You'll have come a long way," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have," said the traveler. The postmaster nodded, the way people nod when a thing confirms what they already suspected, and set down his envelope with the same careful deliberateness with which he had been handling all the others. "Well," he said, "you're here now. And somewhere in the warmth of that small room, in the amber light and the scent of old paper and the soft ticking of the clock and the muffled whispering of the ancient trees outside, the traveler felt, with a certainty as quiet and complete as the village itself, that this was entirely true. Here, and arrived, and safe. Outside, the mist deepened. The village of Whispering Gate settled into the long, gentle dark of a perfect evening, and the fire in the corner of the post office crackled once, softly, and burned on. Part 2. Inside the old post office, the postmaster moved the way water moves through a calm place, not slowly exactly, but without any of the small urgencies that most movement carries. No sharp turns, no sudden reaches, every gesture completed before the next one began, as if each motion were a sentence that deserved its own full stop before the next was started. He came around from behind the counter with a quietness that the old floorboards accommodated entirely. They did not creak beneath him, or if they did, it was a creak so familiar and so expected that it had long since become part of the room's natural breath, as unremarkable as the ticking of the clock or the low voice of the fire. "Come in properly," he said. "Close the door behind you. The village air is lovely, but it has a way of following you in if you let it linger." The traveler closed the door. The latch settled into its housing with a sound like a word said quietly at the end of a long sentence, a sound of completion, of closure, of there. The room was even warmer now that the door was shut. The warmth was not the aggressive warmth of a room overheated, but the patient warmth of a space that had been tended carefully over many hours, built up gradually from the fireplace in the corner until it had reached this precise enveloping temperature, the temperature the traveler thought of a room that has been lived in with intention. The shelves, seen properly now, were extraordinary. They ran from floor to ceiling along the back wall and the wall to the right of the door, broken only by the counter and the fireplace, and two narrow windows whose glass had the old slightly wavy quality that made the lamplight inside look liquid. The shelves were oak, dark oak, aged to the color of strong tea, and upon them, in an order that was immediately legible even if its exact logic was not, rested the accumulated correspondence and materials of a very long operation. Fat parcels wrapped in brown paper sat beside slim envelopes tied in bundles with cotton twine, the knots simple and precise. There were rolls of fresh brown paper stacked upright in a wooden bin at the base of one shelf, and beside them, coils of twine on wooden spools, each spool the same neat diameter. Books stood in rows, leather-bound ledgers, mostly, their spines labeled in careful handwriting, each label protected by a small rectangle of varnish. Between the books, objects, a letter opener with a handle of polished bone, a small brass magnifying glass on a stand, an ink bottle, sealed its contents the dark blue-black of a winter sky, and letters. Letters everywhere, in their pigeonholes and on their shelves, and tucked into the gaps between things, patient and still, carrying within them all their invisible weight of meaning. The traveler looked at all of it and felt something settle inside. The way things settle when a place is so completely itself that it requires nothing from you in return. You could simply stand here and exist, and the room would go on being exactly what it was, and that would be entirely sufficient. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. It was a mantel clock of the proper Victorian sort. Dark wood case with brass fittings, a white enamel face with Roman numerals, hands of blued steel. The tick it made was neither loud nor soft, but precisely what a tick ought to be. A clean, dry click, followed by the briefest of silences, followed by another clean, dry click. There was no variation in it. No hesitation, no hurry. Tick, tick, tick. The traveler became aware of having been listening to it for some time without noticing. It had a quality that certain sounds have, a quality of dissolving into the background and simultaneously becoming the background, so that eventually the rhythm of it becomes the rhythm of the room. And then, if you are not careful, the rhythm of your own breathing. The fire in the corner crackled softly. Not a dramatic crackling, no sparks, no sudden shifts, but the low, continuous small conversation of burning wood that has settled into its task and intends to continue with it indefinitely. The logs were beech and applewood, the postmaster would later mention, because applewood burned slow and sweet and left an ash that was almost white, clean and fine as powder. The light from the fire moved across the brass weighing scale on the counter. The scale was beautiful. It was the kind of scale found in very old post offices and apothecaries. A balance beam on a central post with two hanging pans of polished brass suspended on fine chains. It had been cleaned recently, or perhaps it was cleaned every evening as a matter of course, because the brass had that deep, warm glow that speaks of regular attention rather than occasional polish. The firelight moved across its surface in slow, liquid shifts, and the scale, if you watched it long enough, seemed to be breathing, the pans swaying almost imperceptibly with the air currents of the room, finding their balance again and again in small, peaceful adjustments. "Earl Grey, I think," said the postmaster, as if concluding a deliberation he had been conducting privately. "Unless you'd prefer something with apple in it. I have a cider on the hob that's been warming since before dark." "The cider?" said the traveler, without quite meaning to decide. The postmaster made a sound of quiet approval and moved toward a small annex at the back of the room. Not a separate room exactly, more a deepening of the space, where a small iron stove sat on a tiled hearth, and a collection of copper and tin vessels lived on hooks and on a shelf of their own. The traveler could see from the counter the soft orange glow of the stove's vent. The sounds that came from that corner were extraordinary in their smallness and their clarity. The soft, resonant clink of a ladle against the inside of a copper pot, the low, sibilant hiss of liquid near boiling that had been reduced to a patient simmer, the thin, bright sound of porcelain cups being set on a wooden surface, not careless, but confident, the sound of hands that knew exactly how much pressure was required, the soft percussion of the cupboard door closing, a drawer opening and closing again, the small crystalline sound of a spoon. Each sound arrived in the room complete and separate, like notes in a piece of music written for a very slow tempo. Largo, or slower even than that, a tempo with no name because it had never needed one before. The traveler sat on a low wooden stool near the counter. It was the right height. Everything in the room, it seemed, was the right height, the right weight, the right temperature. The postmaster returned with 2 cups on a small tray and a plate on which sat 3 thin biscuits with a faint pattern pressed into their surface. A leaf, or possibly a postmark. It was difficult to tell in the amber light, and it did not matter. The cider was in a cup of white porcelain, slightly wide at the mouth, the kind of cup that releases scent generously. The traveler took it in both hands. The scent rose slowly. It was warm apple, not sharp, not sweet, but the deep, round warmth of apples that have been left to mature and then heated gently for a long time with something fragrant added. A cinnamon stick, perhaps, and a few cloves, and what might have been a strip of dried orange peel. Beneath the apple was something darker, almost smoky. The cider itself, its fermentation present but gentle, a reminder of autumn pressed into liquid. The first sip was warm all the way down. The postmaster settled into his chair behind the counter with his own cup, Earl Grey, the bergamot lifting faintly into the air and mixing with the apple and the wood smoke into something that had no name but felt, to the traveler, like the olfactory equivalent of being told that everything was going to be fine. For a while, neither of them spoke. This was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of a room that has enough in it already, enough warmth, enough light, enough small sound. That silence between two people becomes simply another comfortable element of the whole. The postmaster sipped his tea. The traveler sipped the cider. The clock ticked. The fire crackled. Outside, somewhere distant, the wind moved through the iron gate and made its soft, continuous music. When the conversation came, it came gently, the way sleep comes when you are not fighting it. "Far?" asked the postmaster. "Far enough," said the traveler. The postmaster nodded. He picked up an envelope from the small stack beside him. He could not, it seemed, be entirely without letters, and turned it in his hands, not reading it, just turning it, as a person might turn a smooth stone. "The roads are long this time of year," he said. "The mist comes early, but it's a soft mist. It doesn't cut. You'll have noticed." "I did notice," said the traveler. "It felt more like a presence than a weather." The postmaster looked pleased at this. Not surprised. The expression was more that of a man who has always known something to be true and is glad to hear someone else arrive at it independently. "That's exactly right," he said. "That's exactly what it is." He set the envelope down with care and took another sip of his tea. The scents in the room shifted as the evening deepened. The wood smoke thickened slightly as the fire was fed. A new log, added without ceremony, pressing the flames briefly lower before they found the fresh fuel and rose again. With the new wood came the sweetness of apple wood sap, a faint, sticky sweetness that was not quite food and not quite forest, but something between them. The dried ink on the letters on the counter had its own presence, a faint mineral sharpness, very faint, the ghost of iron gall and carbon black, the smell of intention dried into permanence. And beneath all of it, continuously, the old paper smell of the room itself. The traveler had stopped noticing it the way you stopped noticing the sound of a river once you have lived beside it long enough. And yet it was there, always, the way the river is always there. Not intrusive, simply true. The postmaster refilled the traveler's cup without being asked, rising and returning so quietly that the moment seemed to happen between moments. "There's no hurry," he said, settling back. "There never is here." The traveler looked at the pigeonholes, at the hundreds of small dark squares each cradling its quiet cargo of words. Looked at the fire, at the clock, at the amber light pooling on the wooden counter and the polished brass of the scale and the white porcelain of the cup. "No," agreed the traveler, "there isn't." The clock ticked on. Each tick was the same as the last. Each tick was the same as the next. The fire breathed. The lamplight stayed warm and steady. Somewhere outside, a very faint wind moved through the trees, and the trees whispered back, and their whispering reached the room as something even softer than a sound, more like the memory of a sound, felt rather than heard, the way you feel the presence of water before you see it. The cider cooled to the temperature of a warm room and was perfect. The biscuits were eaten slowly, one each, the third left on the plate because leaving the third on the plate seemed right. The conversation, when it came in small pieces, unhurried, with long and comfortable silences between them. Silences that grew longer as the evening progressed, as the warmth of the room and the warmth of the cider and the warmth of the company settled deeper and deeper into the bones, into the muscles, into the chest, into the breath itself, until breathing felt like something that was happening to the traveler rather than something the traveler was doing. Slow and even and quiet, in and out, in the amber lamplight, while the fire crackled and the clock ticked, and the letters rested in their pigeonholes, and the old post office of Whispering Gate held everything warmly in the palm of its ancient, patient hand. The postmaster sipped his tea. The traveler closed their eyes for just a moment. Just a moment. Part 3. The guest room above the sorting floor. The postmaster set down his cup. He did it the way he did everything, without announcement, without abruptness, simply completing the gesture and allowing what came next to follow naturally, the way one breath follows another. He rose from his chair, which made the quietest possible sound of old wood accepting and then releasing weight. And he moved to a narrow door set into the back wall of the post office that the traveler had not noticed before. It was not hidden. It was simply the kind of door that does not draw attention to itself. Dark wood, flush with the paneling, a small brass handle at exactly the right height for a hand that knew where to reach. The postmaster opened it and held it, turning to look at the traveler with an expression of such uncomplicated kindness that no words were required. The room upstairs, he said, because words, while not required, were offered anyway. It's been aired. There are blankets enough. The staircase beyond the door was narrow and straight, with a wooden banister worn glassy smooth on its upper face by the accumulated passage of many hands. The stairs themselves were dark wood, each one slightly different in height from the last, in the way of very old staircases, built by someone who understood that a staircase should be climbed with attention. That attention slows a person, and that slowing is nearly always good. The traveler climbed. Each step had its own voice, not a loud voice, a low, domestic creak, personal to that particular board, the kind of sound that would have been entirely familiar to anyone who had lived in this building for more than a week. Third step, a long, low moan, very soft. Sixth step, a brief, bright complaint, quickly resolved. Ninth step, silence, solid and dense as stone. And then the landing. And then the door. The room was small. Small in the way that the inside of a shell is small, proportioned perfectly to the creature it is meant to contain. Curved inward around its single purpose. The ceiling followed the roofline, sloping down on the far side to a height that would have required ducking if you walked to the very edge, though the bed was positioned so that you would not need to. The floor was dark wooden planks, wide and slightly uneven, their surfaces worn to a soft patina that caught the light from the small oil lamp on the bedside table and held it warm and still. The traveler stood in the doorway for a moment, simply looking. The walls were white plaster, slightly uneven, dimpled in places where the old structure had shifted over its many decades, and the plaster had moved with it, leaving small ridges and hollows that the lamplight turned into a gentle geography of shadow. On the walls, framed in dark wood, hung things that deserved looking at. Here, a sheet of vintage postage stamps mounted behind glass. 12 stamps in 2 rows of 6, each one a different country, each one a small painting in its own right. A deep red stamp with a sailing ship, a green stamp with a mountain range, very small and very precise. A purple stamp with a profile so worn that the face had become almost abstract, the suggestion of dignity without its specifics. A yellow stamp with a bird the traveler did not recognize, perched on a branch with an expression of enormous self-possession. There, a map, old, its paper the color of weak tea, its coastlines confident in their inaccuracy. It showed a part of the world that might have been a real place, or might have been a dreamed one. The names of the towns were in a handwriting so small and so faded that reading them would have required the postmaster's magnifying glass. And in any case, it was too late in the evening for that kind of reading. The map had been folded many times in its history, and the fold lines were part of it now. A grid of soft creases that gave it a texture like the surface of water seen from a great height. And here, beside the window, a small framed print of a postal route, a line drawn across a landscape with small illustrations at intervals showing a horse, a bridge, a village, a hill. The line ended at a building that might have been, if you looked at it a certain way and were in the right mood, this very building. The window. It was not large, perhaps 18 inches wide, perhaps 2 feet tall, set into the slope of the wall where the ceiling met the eaves, its frame painted white, and its glass old and slightly thick at the edges. The traveler moved to it and looked out. Whispering Gate lay below and around, sleeping. The mist had deepened since arrival, as evening mist does. It was not thick enough to obscure, but soft enough to soften, to round the edges of things, to make the rooftops and chimneys and the tops of the old trees into shapes rather than objects, presences rather than particulars. A few windows showed light, warm yellow here, a cooler white there from somewhere with a newer lamp. A chimney breathed smoke that dissolved immediately into the mist. The lane below was empty, its cobblestones gleaming faintly with damp, the lamp post at the corner maintaining its small, steady vigil, and above, or rather through, because the mist thinned somewhat higher up, the moon, not full, not quite, but generous, enough to cast a light that was not light exactly, but a brightening, a general silver suffusion that fell through the old glass of the window and into the room, and lay there on the floorboards in a long, cool rectangle, very still. In that rectangle of moonlight, dust moved, slowly, so slowly. Motes of something, dust, yes, but also perhaps the fine particulate of old paper and dried ink and decades of careful occupation, drifting in their small, unhurried paths through the column of cooled silver air that came off the glass. The traveler watched them. They had no direction, or rather, they had all directions equally, moving by the most invisible currents in the most minimal ways, each mote its own universe of unhurried drift. It was the slowest thing the traveler had ever watched, and watching it, the traveler's own breath slowed to match. The bed. It was a proper bed, a Victorian iron bedstead, painted black, with knobs at each corner that had been worn slightly by hands that had gripped them to pull back the covers over many years. The mattress was deep, and the sheets were white cotton, well laundered, with the faint smell of line drying and cold air still in them, clean and neutral, the smell of absence, of nothing having happened yet. Over the sheets lay blankets, not one, several. They were stacked in the particular way of beds that have been made up in cold rooms, each blanket tucked firmly at the sides and foot, creating a kind of envelope, a contained warmth that the body would enter and then inhabit, and then gradually claim, heating it from within until the space between the sheets was precisely the temperature of rest. The topmost blanket was wool, dark green, heavy, with a texture that was not quite soft but not rough either, a texture that offered the fingertips enough to register without demanding attention. The traveler ran a hand across it. The weight of the blankets, even before getting in, was apparent. They had mass. They would settle. They would press. Gently, the way good blankets press. Not constraining, but surrounding, the way a room surrounds, the way a building surrounds, the way a village in the mist surrounds. Entirely, and with complete, impersonal gentleness. The traveler undressed slowly, folded things that were foldable, set things aside, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. The room held its warmth differently up here than downstairs. Not the warmth of an active fire, but the stored warmth of a space that had been heated gradually all day. Absorbed into the plaster and the wood and the heavy blankets themselves, a warmth that was now simply the property of the room, independent of any source, patient and thorough. The traveler could smell cedarwood. It was faint, more a presence than a scent, the way the distant sea is present in a coastal town, even when you cannot see it. It came from somewhere, a sachet tucked into the wardrobe perhaps, or from the wardrobe's wood itself, cedar lined against moths. The wood's oils slow releasing into the room over many years. Beneath the cedar was the paper smell that permeated the entire building, softer here than downstairs, filtered through the floorboards, but unmistakable. And beneath that, fainter still, old books. A small shelf beside the window held perhaps a dozen volumes, their spines too dim to read by lamplight, and they were breathing their slow breath into the room, as books do when left in warm, quiet spaces, giving off that particular dry sweetness that is one of the most comforting scents the world has produced. From below, through the floorboards, came a sound. It was the postmaster, still working. The sound arrived muffled and rhythmic, a soft, repeated thud, very regular, with the quality of something certain and deliberate. The rubber stamp, the traveler thought, or the brass postmark. The postmaster stamping letters at his counter one by one, working through the evening's last tasks with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. Thud. A pause. Thud. A pause. It was a sound like a heartbeat, slower than a heartbeat and more deliberate, but with that same quality of reliable repetition, of a rhythm that would continue whether or not you were listening. The traveler lay down. The blankets received the body with the gradual warmth of something patient. The pillow was cool at first, against the cheek, and then warm. The weight of the wool blanket settled across the chest and the arms and the legs, slowly, the way water fills a vessel, finding every contour, until the whole body was held. From below, thud. A pause. Thud. The moon moved its rectangle of silver light slowly across the floorboards. The dust motes drifted in their column of cooled air beside the window. The cedarwood breathed. The old books breathed. The village outside lay in its mist, its rooftops soft, its chimneys still. The traveler's eyes were open, and then they were less open, and then they were the kind of open that is almost closed, the kind of open that the world behind them sees only in blurs and impressions, the warm yellow of the oil lamp, the silver of the moonlight, the dark shapes of the framed stamps and maps on the walls. Thud, a pause. The clock downstairs ticked, barely audible, its tick a ghost of itself by the time it reached up through the wooden floor and into the dark and the warmth of the room under the eaves. Tick, thud, tick, tick. The traveler's breath had long since found its slow, even rhythm. The chest rose, the chest fell. The blankets moved with it a fraction of an inch and settled again. The room breathed with the traveler, or the traveler breathed with the room. It was by now impossible to say which was which. The lamp burned on for a while. Then it was less bright. Then it was the lamp itself that was dreaming its flame low and steady, a small warm point in the dark of the room, surrounded by the dark and the quiet and the sound of the postmark stamp below and the ticking of the clock and the whispering of the gate and the silver drift of dust in moonlight. All of it growing fainter now, all of it growing softer, all of it receding gently, the way the sound of hooves on cobblestone had receded into the mist on the traveler's arrival. Slower, 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 until there was only the warmth, and then only the dark, and then not even that. The frosty glass is cold beneath your fingertip when you reach out, almost without meaning to, and touch it gently. Inside, the hearth is burning. You can see the firelight moving on the far stone wall, warm, alive, steadily breathing. You do not know what brings you to the door. Perhaps the cold, perhaps the light, perhaps simply the feeling, that old instinctive feeling that certain places give you, the feeling that says, here, this is the right place. This is where you are meant to be this evening. You lift the small iron knocker, shaped, you notice, like a thimble, and let it fall very gently against the wooden door. A pause, the soft crackle of the fire within, the distant, muffled tick of a clock. Then footsteps, quiet, unhurried, moving slowly toward the door with no sense of urgency whatsoever. The footsteps of someone for whom the whole of the evening is calm and accounted for whom nothing is rushed or unexpected. The door opens. The quilt maker is elderly, truly, softly elderly in the way that very old trees are, which is to say that their age seems not like a diminishment, but a kind of gathered richness, a depth accumulated slowly over many years. Their hair is white, very fine, swept back simply. Their eyes, catching the warm light from within, are quiet and clear, eyes that have looked at many things carefully and found most of them beautiful. They are wearing a plain dark dress beneath a long cream-colored apron, and the apron has small faded stains of something that might be indigo dye or blackcurrant jam. And around their collar is a length of soft flannel, loosely wound against the cold. Their hands, resting on the doorframe, are small and extremely capable looking, with the kind of fine papery texture that speaks of decades of patient work. They look at you. Their expression does not change with surprise or question or any of the ordinary social calculations. They simply look at you, and their look is simply kind. You look cold, they say. Their voice is low, unhurried, with the particular softness of someone who has spent many long evenings in a quiet cottage and has long since stopped feeling the need to raise it. Come in, then. It is not a question. The warmth that reaches you as you step through the door is extraordinary. It is not the sharp warmth of an overheated room. It is the deep warmth of a room that has been warm for a very long time. A warmth that has seeped into the stone walls and the flagged floor and the heavy curtains and the wooden beams above. A warmth that is almost a presence in itself, gentle, pervasive, completely enveloping. You cross the threshold and the cold of the evening falls away from your shoulders like something set down, and you are inside. The door closes softly behind you. The fire crackles on the hearth, steady and low. The room is full of color and texture and the warm smell of wood smoke and something else, something quiet and sweet. Lavender perhaps, or beeswax, or simply the long ingrained fragrance of a room where beautiful cloth has been folded and handled and cared for over many, many years. The quilt maker moves back toward the fire, unhurried, and gestures to a low cushioned chair drawn close to the hearth. "Sit," they say. "There is tea." You sit down. The chair is very soft. The fire is very warm. Outside, the mist has thickened around the village, and the cobblestones are silver dark, and somewhere the sound of carriage wheels is rolling slowly, gently away into the distance. You let out a long, slow breath, and you feel simply, completely, without any remaining effort, at rest. The fire burns low and steady on the hearth. The quilts glow in the amber light. The village breathes quietly outside. And here, in this small, warm room at the end of the day, everything is exactly as it should be. Part 2. Inside the quilt maker's workshop, the chair holds you like something that has been waiting. It is low and wide and upholstered in a fabric the color of old moss. Thick, slightly worn at the arms, the cushion shaped by years of use into something that fits the body perfectly, welcomingly, as though it were made not for anyone in particular, but for anyone who needed, at the end of a long day, simply to sit down and stop. You settle into it, and it settles around you, and the fire before you breathes its quiet, orange breath. And for a moment, you do nothing at all except exist in the warmth. The room arranges itself slowly around you, the way rooms do when you are truly still in them, when you are not moving through them or searching them for something, but simply in them, receiving. The workshop is not large, but it is full, not crowded, not cluttered, full in the way that a life well lived is full. Every inch of it occupied by something that belongs there, something with a history and a purpose, nothing superfluous, nothing accidentally arrived. The stone walls are thick and old, the kind of walls that hold warmth the way cupped hands hold water. Carefully, completely. The ceiling is low, crossed with dark wooden beams, and from one of them hangs a small bunch of dried lavender, its color faded now to the softest gray purple, its scent still faintly present in the warm air. Along the far wall run the work tables. There are 2 of them, long and broad, their surfaces of smoothed old oak worn pale in the places where hands and fabric have passed most often, and upon them rest the materials of the craft in a state of beautiful, particular order. Bolts of fabric are stacked at one end, velvet the color of midnight, and forest and deep burgundy. Flannel in softer tones of gray and oat and dusty rose. Silk in lengths that catch the firelight and throw it back in slow, rippling shifts of gold and cream. Each bolt is neatly rolled, neatly stacked, the edges aligned with quiet care. Beside the bolts, the baskets. There are 4 of them at least, large and wide and overflowing with fabric scraps. Pieces of every size and color, some no larger than a playing card, others long irregular strips, all of them sorted loosely, tumbled together in the baskets in a way that is not quite orderly, but is somehow still pleasing. A harvest of color and texture gathered from 100 different projects. You can see, from where you sit, a scrap of deep green velvet, a torn triangle of yellow cotton printed with small blue flowers, a length of cream silk ribbon coiled loosely on top, and beneath it all, buried almost out of sight, a piece of something red and woolen that might once have been a child's winter coat. The spools of thread stand in rows along a narrow shelf above the nearer table. There are many of them, dozens, perhaps, each one wound with its own particular color, and in the firelight they form a long, glowing sequence of hues that is almost like a painting. The deep navies and forest greens at one end, moving through teals and sage and the warm gray of early morning sky, into the yellows and golds and soft ambers of the middle, then onto the pinks, the roses, the faded mauves, and finally, at the far end, the creams and the whites, and one spool of the purest silver thread that catches the fire more than any of the others and holds it like a small, steady star. The quilt maker moves among all of this without haste, without drama, in the easy, practiced way of someone who has moved among these same objects every day for longer than they could easily count. They do not bump the baskets or disturb the folded cloth. They simply move, slowly, quietly, with a sureness of hand and foot that is deeply calming to watch, the way it is calming to watch a river moving in a familiar channel. From somewhere deeper in the cottage comes the small, clear sound of water being poured. You hear it clearly in the hush. The liquid sound of water filling a kettle, unhurried, the pitch rising gradually as the vessel fills, and then a soft metallic clink as the kettle is set upon the hob, and then the very faint, low sigh of heat beginning its slow work. The quilt maker returns to the workshop, drying their hands on the edge of their apron. Chamomile, they say, by way of explanation, and you nod, and that is the whole of the conversation about it. 3 syllables, entirely sufficient. They pull a second, smaller chair from beneath the nearer work table, a plain wooden chair with a cushion of faded blue tied to its seat, and place it beside your own, close to the fire, and sit down, with the slow, considered movement of someone who does not sit down carelessly, but attends to it, settling into stillness as deliberately as they settle into work. For a little while, neither of you speaks. The fire speaks for you. It crackles, a small, bright crackle, as a piece of wood shifts and releases its stored air in a tiny, quick burst, and then settles back into its low, steady conversation with itself. The sound of it is extraordinary when you attend to it closely. It is not one sound, but many, a continuous layered murmur of soft hisses and ticks and occasional deeper pops, the wood contracting and expanding and giving itself over slowly to the heat, and beneath all of that, the deeper, barely audible sound of the draw, the chimney, breathing the smoke upward into the cold dark above the cottage, patient and unhurried. The shadows move on the flagged stone floor, long, warm, amber shadows cast by the firelight, shifting gently as the flames rise and fall. They move across the floor and up the far wall and over the stacked bolts of fabric, and where they touch the silk, the light seems to sink into it and glow from within, as though the fabric itself were faintly, warmly lit. The ticking of the grandfather clock reaches you from the hallway beyond, It is steady, completely, absolutely steady. The kind of steadiness that is not merely mechanical, but feels almost intentional, almost kind. Tick, tick, tick. Low and resonant, each beat a small, contained sound that falls and is absorbed by the warm air of the room and replaced, without pause, by the next. You have heard clocks all your life, and yet this one, in this room, at this hour, seems to be doing something slightly different from what clocks usually do. It is not measuring the passage of time so much as it is anchoring it, holding the present moment open, spacious, unhurried, saying in its quiet, rhythmic way, "There is no rush. There is only now, tick, and now, tick, and now." The kettle begins, very faintly, to sing. Not a whistle, not yet, simply the first, barely there murmur of warming water, a sound so soft you might almost imagine it, a low and gentle hum that rises by degrees as the heat builds beneath it. You listen to it without effort, without intention, the way you listen to rain, simply aware of it, simply receiving it. As it rises and fills the quiet spaces between the ticking of the clock and the breathing of the fire, the quilt maker rises. Their footsteps move to the kitchen and back. You hear the small sounds, one after another, each one, quiet and distinct and deeply familiar in the way that domestic sounds always are. The chime of a teapot lid lifted, the gentle clink of a cup placed on a saucer, the soft sound of liquid poured in a slow, steady stream. Then the carrying of it, the light, careful footsteps returning, and the quilt maker is beside you again, placing the teacup gently into your hands. The cup is warm through the porcelain. Not hot, warm. Exactly, precisely warm. The warmth of something that will be kind to your hands and your throat and your chest. The tea inside is pale gold in the firelight, and from its surface rises a thin thread of steam curling slowly upward, dissipating into the warm air of the room. You bring it close and breathe before you drink. Chamomile, and beneath it, or perhaps woven through it, as threads are woven through cloth, the faintest suggestion of honey and something else, something you cannot quite name, something slightly sweet and green and ancient. You think, without quite knowing why, of open meadows in late summer, of long, slow afternoons, of drowsiness. You drink, slowly. The scent of the room settles around you as you drink. It is the scent of lavender, that dried bunch above, releasing its quietest ghost of fragrance into the warm air, and the scent of beeswax from the candles on the mantelpiece, burning low and steady, and the deeper, older scent of the room itself, the cloth and the wooden beams, and the cold stone warmed by long years of fire. It is a scent that does not ask anything of you. It is simply present, like the warmth, like the ticking of the clock, like the amber light, a layer of comfort that you receive without effort, without decision. The quilt maker reaches into the nearer basket and draws out a long piece of navy flannel, spreading it across their lap with the quiet attention of someone examining something they know very well. This one needs finishing, they say. Not to you particularly, not requiring a reply. Simply observing. Their hands move to the small wooden workbox on the table beside them. A shallow box, its lid inlaid with a simple pattern of lighter wood, worn smooth, and lift from it a needle already threaded, laid to rest there at some earlier moment for just this purpose. They draw the needle through the fabric with the slowest, most fluid motion, pulling the thread through in one long, unhurried arc, and then back, and then through again. The sound of it is almost imperceptible. The faintest shush of thread through cloth, the tiniest whisper of resistance, and then release, over and over, in a rhythm as steady as breathing. You do not try to watch. You simply let your eyes rest on the firelight. The heavy cloth in the basket shifts faintly as the warmth from the fire stirs the air. The silk on the work table catches the light and holds it. From outside, very far away, softened almost to silence by the fog and the thick old walls, you hear the faint sound of the village settling into its evening. A door closing somewhere, a horse shifting in a stable yard, the distant sound of bells from the church tower tolling the hour in slow, resonant strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each stroke fades completely before the next arrives. The silence between them is immense and soft. The quilt maker sews on, unhurried. The fire breathes. The clock ticks. The steam from your teacup rises and thins and disappears. The dried lavender above the beam releases its quiet scent into the warm air, and the beeswax candles burn without flickering. And the quilts on their shelves and their folded stacks glow softly in the amber light, each one a gathered warmth, a patient record of careful hands and slow hours, and love translated stitch by stitch into cloth. Part 1. Arrival in the Cotswolds. The coach had been rolling for a long time. You are not quite sure how long. The hours had softened and blurred somewhere past the last market town, somewhere between the turning of the wheels and the steady, lulling sway of the carriage. The countryside beyond the misted window had grown quieter, the fields flattening into gentle rolls, the hedgerows thickening with frost, and the sky above deepening from a pale, washed gray into something warmer, a slow, amber-tinged dusk settling over the hills like a heavy blanket drawn up to the chin. You let your eyes close for a moment, then open them again, and there, as if the village had simply appeared while you were not looking, is the first gentle glow of window light through the fog. The village comes to you slowly, the way all the best things do. First, only shapes, dark forms rising from the mist, the curved spines of rooftops, the soft suggestion of chimney stacks, a church tower, standing patient and still against the violet sky. Then, as the coach rounds the final bend and begins to slow, the shapes gather detail. Stone walls the color of warm honey, cobblestones slick with cold evening damp, narrow lanes between the cottages, barely wide enough for a cart, wound about with climbing ivy gone rust red with the season. The coachman says nothing. He simply draws the horses to a gentle stop, and you step down onto the cobblestones, and for a moment you only stand there, breathing. The air is cold, softly, perfectly cold, the kind of cold that is not harsh, but simply present, settling around your shoulders like a shawl of clean winter air. And with it comes the scent. Wood smoke, that old, unhurried scent of wood smoke curling from a dozen chimneys at once, rich and amber dark, and utterly comforting in the way that only a few scents in the world can be. Scents that reach back past thought, past memory, past all the complexity of a waking day, and simply say, you are safe now. You are somewhere warm. You breathe it in slowly, let it settle. The village is not silent, but its sounds are soft, muffled, distant, as though the fog has laid a gentle hand over everything and hushed it to a murmur. Somewhere, not far away, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones, rolling slow and even, a rhythm like a quiet heartbeat. The wheels turn and turn, and their sound grows gradually fainter, rolling away down some unseen lane until it dissolves into the mist entirely. Footsteps, soft and unhurried, pass somewhere behind you. A woman with a basket, her heels a gentle tap, tap, tap on the whetstone, growing quieter, fading. A door opens somewhere, a brief swell of warmth and light, the murmur of low voices, and then closes again with a soft click, leaving only the hush. Somewhere above you, a bird settles into the eaves with a small flutter, then goes still. The village breathes slowly. You breathe with it. The amber light from the windows is the most beautiful thing. Each cottage window glows like a lantern set deep in the stone, the old mullioned glass catching the firelight within and fracturing it gently, casting long, soft-edged diamonds of gold out onto the wet cobblestones at your feet. You walk slowly, no particular hurry, your traveling bag carried easy at your side, your footsteps quiet against the stones. You pass a baker's, long since shuttered for the evening, its sign swaying faintly in the gentlest of cold breezes. You pass the post office, a single oil lamp burning in its window, the flame perfectly still. You pass an old stone wall, draped in dead wisteria, its gnarled branches silver with frost, and through a low gate you see the glimmer of a kitchen fire through a cottage window. A woman at a table, moving slowly, bent over some gentle evening task. The light everywhere is amber, warm amber and pale gold, and the soft blue-gray of the mist between them. Dusk has fully fallen now, but it is not dark the way that darkness is cold or threatening. It is dark the way thick wool is dark, the way a closed eye is dark. Simply soft, simply restful. You walk on, unhurried. And then you see the sign. It is a small sign hung on a bracket of wrought iron above a low doorway, a wooden panel painted in faded cream and carved into its surface with great patience and evident love, the image of a needle threaded with a looping length of thread. The carving is simple but very fine, the grooves worn smooth with age, and the sign hangs with a gentle, barely there sway, turning just slightly in the cool air before settling again. Beneath the needle and thread, in small, careful lettering, the words, "The Quilt Maker." You stop. Through the window, low, wide, the old glass uneven and full of soft distortions. You can see them. The quilts. They are folded in neat, beautiful stacks along the deep sill and on a long wooden shelf behind it. And even through the frost-hazed glass and the amber warmth of the interior light, their colors are extraordinary. Deep blues and soft greens, and the rich red of old roses, and a cream so warm it is almost gold. Patchwork patterns, tiny pieces fitted together with such care, such patient precision, catch the firelight and glow. At the door to the carriage, the traveler turned. There were things to say. The traveler could feel them, a whole gathering of them. Words of gratitude and recognition, and the particular love one feels for people who give gifts without needing acknowledgement for the giving. But Emiliano made a small gesture, unhurried, that somehow absorbed all of it and returned it simply as warmth. "Safe travels," he said. All of them. The traveler stepped up into the carriage and found a window seat, and the train began its slow departure. The platform sliding past, the station drawing back, the yards opening up into open country, with their quiet geometry of rails and signals, and the blue morning light lying flat and clean across it all. Emiliano was already gone. Back to the station, back to the corridor and the platforms, and the long, reliable work of being present for whoever arrived next. The traveler held the vial up to the window. In the morning light, it glowed differently, warmer, less silver now, more gold, the luminescence steady and unhurried. It seemed almost to pulse. Or perhaps that was simply the traveler's own pulse, felt through the fingers, the body's constant and ordinary miracle. The countryside moved past. The rails sang their quiet traveling song. And in the palm of one hand, small as a secret and weightless as understanding, the light went on, doing what it had always done, shining without effort, from the inside out. There are 3 of them you have established. A large tabby of indefinite age and unshakable dignity, who lives primarily in the luggage room and has an arrangement with the trunks that suits all parties. A younger tortoiseshell who prefers the engine yard and is often found sitting on the warm brick of the shed walls in the late morning sun. And a small, entirely black cat of unknown provenance who arrived one November several years ago and has never left, and who resides mostly in the first-class waiting room on the green velvet bench nearest the window. He carries the food in a small tin, warmed slightly on the stove. Not hot, just the edge off the cold, because it is his view that cats, like travelers, deserve a meal that has been thoughtfully prepared. The tabby appears from behind a trunk the moment the tin is opened, its manner combining urgent interest with a studied attempt at nonchalance. The tortoiseshell must be fetched from the yard, or rather, informed, which consists of the porter standing at the yard door for a moment and saying, quietly, "Mid-morning," as though issuing a gentle reminder of an appointment, after which the cat descends from its wall and arrives in its own time. The black cat is already in the waiting room when you reach it. It is sitting upright on the green velvet in the posture of something that has been informed of nothing and has arrived entirely of its own accord, by coincidence, and would appreciate it if you did not suggest otherwise. The porter sets down the 3 portions on their saucers without comment. He watches them eat for a moment with the expression he reserves for things done well. A quiet, settled satisfaction. Not proud exactly, but pleased in the way that one is pleased by the correct functioning of a system that has been designed with care. Midday tea is made with the same attention as every other thing. The water is brought to the full boil and not a moment past it. He listens to it, the pot on the range, hearing the moment the boil becomes a full rolling boil by its sound alone, lifting the pot at precisely that moment with a cloth around the handle, and carrying it to the teapot, which has been warmed with a small quantity of water, swirled and emptied beforehand. The tea, loose measured in the small silver spoon he keeps for exactly this purpose, is allowed to steep for 4 minutes. Not 3, not 5. He watches the platform while it steeps. You stand beside him at the window, the 2 of you looking out along the length of the platform as the midday train comes in. It comes in slowly, as all trains come in here. This station is not a fast station, not a rushing through station, but a considered one. A station where arrivals are taken seriously. The engine rounds the gentle curve at the platform's far end with a long descending sigh of steam, its wheels already slow, the great driving rods completing their circles with a stately deliberation that is, in its way, beautiful. The carriages follow, swaying very slightly as the speed falls, their windows passing like a sequence of lit rooms, a face here, a hand on a window there. Someone reaching for a bag on the overhead shelf, someone leaning back with eyes closed, already somewhere else in their thoughts. The train stops, the platform receives it. A handful of passengers descend, and a handful board, and there is a brief, ordinary bustle of the kind, thousands of times a day, at thousands of stations across the country, without anyone marking it as remarkable, which is perhaps the best evidence of how remarkable it is. An engine and its carriages and its fuel and its crew and its timetable all converging at exactly this point, at exactly this hour. Day after day, the whole enormous, intricate system of it functioning so reliably that the people stepping on and off do so without looking up, without marveling, without once considering what it required to make this ordinary moment possible. The porter watches all of it. He watches it the way he winds the clocks and polishes the handles and writes the ledger entries and feeds the cats with full attention, without urgency, finding in the watching what he has always found in every task that is done completely and without remainder. The train departs. The platform is quiet again. Tea should be ready, he says, and you go in. The station breathed differently after midnight. It was Emiliano who suggested the walk, not the young porter who scurried about with luggage carts and apologies, but the older one, the one with the silver-threaded mustache and the unhurried way of moving, as though he had long since made peace with time. He had found the traveler sitting alone on a bench near platform 3, coat folded across the lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. A quiet person recognizes another quiet person. Without ceremony, Emiliano had said only, "Come, the tracks are worth seeing at this hour." And somehow, without question, the traveler had risen and followed. They passed through a low iron gate at the far end of the platform, the hinges sighing like something half asleep, and stepped out into the open space behind the station where the world fell away into a long corridor of shadow and silver. The tracks ran ahead of them in twin lines, curving gently out of sight toward the eastern hills. At this hour they had stopped being instruments of industry and become something else entirely, something lunar, almost devotional. The rails caught the starlight along their polished upper edges and held it, so that two unbroken rivers of soft luminescence stretched into the dark, parallel and patient, as though the sky had simply decided to lie down and rest a while upon the earth. The traveler slowed without meaning to, arrested by it. "I never get used to it," Emiliano said, noticing. 22 years, and I still stop here most nights to look." The gravel underfoot gave a small, muffled crunch with each step, a sound like the settling of a house, like the turning of pages in an empty library. It was cool out, but gently so, the kind of cool that does not demand anything of you, that simply rests against the skin the way a grandmother's hand rests against a forehead. The traveler pulled the coat on properly and felt, with some surprise, deeply comfortable. Far down the yard, 3 or 4 trains stood in their sidings, dark and enormous. They were not sleeping exactly. Machines do not sleep, but they had assumed something like the posture of sleep, still, massed, their breath held. Occasionally, a soft metallic sound drifted up from their direction, a tick or a groan of cooling metal, and the night absorbed it easily, the way still water absorbs a stone. The traveler thought about all the miles those trains had traveled that day, all the windows through which the countryside had poured like a film, unreeling, all the faces momentarily illuminated in their glass reflections. And now this, This perfect cessation. The station building itself glowed amber behind them. A single lamp on platform 1 swept its yellow circle back and forth in a slow arc, moved by nothing visible, or perhaps by the gentlest of breezes. It caught the edge of a baggage cart, the corner of a sign, the back of a bench, and released each in turn, and the traveler watched it for a long time, hypnotized, the way one watches the beam of a lighthouse from a hillside, not for any practical reason, but because something in the rhythmic sweep answers something rhythmic inside the chest. "Do you think about them?" the traveler asked eventually. "The people who pass through?" Emiliano considered the question without hurry. They had stopped walking by some mutual unspoken agreement and were standing side by side between the rails, which was perhaps not strictly permitted, but felt, at this hour, entirely reasonable. "Every day," he said, "and at night, too, sometimes, but not in a sad way. More like, you know how a river thinks about its water? It doesn't mourn the water that has passed. It is simply made of passing." The traveler turned this over. "I used to want to hold on to things," the traveler said. "Moments, places. I thought if I held tightly enough they wouldn't go. And now?" A pause. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird called once and fell silent. Now I think the holding was the problem. I was so busy clutching the moment that I couldn't feel it. Emiliano made a small sound of agreement, warm and unperforming. He reached into his breast pocket and produced 2 wrapped sweets, the kind sold at the station kiosk, hard candies in crinkled paper, and offered one without comment. The traveler accepted it. They unwrapped them in companionable quiet, the paper crinkling loudly and absurdly in the stillness, and both of them smiled at the sound. They walked on. The gravel gave way briefly to packed earth, then back to gravel again, each texture speaking its own particular word beneath the feet. The stars above were extraordinary, this far from the main platforms. Away from even the station's modest light, they arrived in multitudes, crowded and careless, spilled like sugar across a dark cloth. The traveler tipped the head back and felt the familiar ancient sensation. Smallness without sadness, the loosening of something knotted behind the sternum. "I used to think," Emiliano said, "that the purpose of travel was the destination. That all this, the waiting, the passing through, was simply the price you paid. And now?" He gestured unhurriedly at the space around them, at the rails holding their stolen starlight, at the distant amber glow of the station, at the gravel, the cool air, the resting trains, the lamplight making its patient revolutions. "Now I think this is the destination," he said. "All of it, every between place, every in-between hour." The traveler felt something shift, quietly and without drama, the way a door that has been stuck for a long season finally swings open on a warm day, not with any great force, just with ease, and a sense of having always been about to. Gratitude arrived in the way it sometimes does at night, not as a thought, but as a sensation, warm and spreading, beginning somewhere below the ribs and moving upward. Gratitude for this walk, unplanned and unscheduled, for the porter who had simply said come and meant it, for the rails and their light-keeping, for the night bird, for the candy wrapper's crinkle, for the specific cool of this specific air, for being here at all, in this between place, in this between hour. They turned back eventually, neither of them announcing the decision. The station drew them gently, its amber windows like the windows of a house one has lived in for a long time and loves Without always noticing, the lamp was still sweeping its slow arc across Platform 1. A night train was being readied somewhere in the distance. The traveler could hear the first stirrings, the low, purposeful sounds of something large, remembering its function. At the gate, Emiliano held it open, and the hinges sighed again. "Thank you," the traveler said. It was not enough, and was exactly enough. The old porter smiled, not the professional smile he deployed for passengers with questions and complaints, but a smaller, quieter one, worn only in certain hours. "Sleep well," he said. "The morning trains are kind ones." The traveler walked back through the station, past the dozing ticket windows, the dark kiosk, the benches where strangers had sat and would sit again, and found the small room beyond Platform 4 that had been arranged for the night. The sheets were cool and plain. The window looked out on the yard, and there, just visible from the pillow, the two rails still ran their quiet course into the dark, still holding what starlight they had been given, steady and unhurried, going nowhere and everywhere at once. The traveler closed both eyes, and for perhaps the first time in a very long journey, felt no need to be anywhere else. Outside, the lamp went on sweeping. The gravel settled. The trains breathed their slow, metallic breath, and the night held everything gently, the way it always does, like cupped hands full of water, careful not to spill. It happened just before the first light, that particular shade of dark that is not quite night anymore, when the sky turns from black to a deep, exhausted blue, and the stars don't vanish so much as recede, politely, as though stepping back to allow someone else through. The traveler had not slept so much as drifted, the way you drift in shallow water, aware of the surface but untroubled by it, and had woken, if waking was the right word, to find the window full of that blue and the yard outside very still, and a feeling of unusual clarity sitting quietly in the chest like a warm stone. Emiliano was waiting in the corridor, not waiting in any urgent sense. He was simply there, the way certain things are simply there in the early morning. A cup already filled, a door already open, as though they had been arranged by some gentle and attentive intelligence that asks nothing in return. He had his uniform coat on, but the brass buttons were not all fastened, and his cap was tucked under his arm rather than worn, which gave him the look of a man between roles, belonging more to the morning than to the station. In his other hand he held something small. He did not draw attention to it. "You are leaving on the 7:15?" he said. It was not a question. "I am." He nodded, and they stood for a moment in the particular companionship that had grown between them, not long enough to have history, but deep enough, somehow, to have trust. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere below, the station was beginning its first tentative stirrings. A trolley wheel, a distant door, the low exchange of voices from the platform staff arriving for the early shift. But up here, not yet. Up here, there was still a margin of stillness, and they were standing in it together. The roof is iron and glass. The iron comes in great arching ribs, each one springing from a point perhaps 30 feet up the side walls and meeting its partner at the apex in a long ridge that runs the full length of the hall. And between the ribs, panels of glass, old glass, slightly uneven, the kind that distorts the light passing through it by fractions, so that the sky visible beyond is not a flat blue, but a living one, shifting and breathing as clouds move across it and as your own position shifts. The light that comes through is not ordinary morning light. It has been worked on by its passage through the old glass, softened and slightly scattered, arriving on the hall floor as something warmer and less precise than light outdoors. A light that belongs here, that has become part of the place. The hall floor is stone, large pale flags laid in a simple grid, and the light lies on them in long bright parallelograms that will move as the morning moves, are already moving, are always in this state of slow and imperceptible migration from one position to the next, the way the minute hand of the station clock is always moving and yet is never caught in the act. You walk into the light. Your footsteps sound different here, more present, returning to you from the iron ribs above with a faint, pleasant echo, as though the hall is quietly acknowledging each step. You let your pace slow further. There is no reason here for any pace except the one that feels right. And the pace that feels right is slow and slower than that, until you are simply walking the way water moves on a still day. Along the eastern wall, a long counter stretches the full length of the hall. Its dark wood, polished to the same deep gleam as everything else in this station that has been attended to across many years with care and beeswax and the simple determination that things ought to look as good as they possibly can. Behind the counter, a wall of wooden pigeonholes, hundreds of them, arranged in a grid that ascends nearly to the ceiling, each hole the right size for a folded paper or a small envelope or a slim booklet of tickets. Many are empty. Some contain folded papers of ivory and cream. A few hold objects, a small parcel tied in string, a single glove of gray kid leather standing primly in its cubby as though waiting to be claimed, a brass object too distant to identify precisely, catching the hall light with a small private wink. On the counter itself, the instruments. You move toward them slowly, the way you approach anything worth looking at, without rushing the approach, understanding that the distance between you and the thing you want to see is part of the seeing. A ticket punch resting on its side. It is larger than you expected, its handles worn smooth by the grip of the many hands that have closed them together over the years. Its jaws still perfectly aligned, the spring mechanism visible along its hinge, a coiled thing of bright steel, patient as a held breath. Beside it, its impressions, a small wooden tray lined with the circular paper discs the punches produced over time. Hundreds of tiny perfect circles in cream and buff, accumulated like a slow accumulation of completed moments. A brass stamp in a wooden handle, its face too small to read without lifting it. You do not lift it. It is beautiful as it stands, the brass warm and dully gleaming, the wood worn to a shape that fits a hand no longer here, a magnifying glass with a tortoise-shell handle, a steel ruler tarnished along one edge where a hand always steadied it, an inkwell, dry now but stained permanently in its glass interior with a deep, resonant blue, the color of something still present, even in its absence. You stand at the counter for a long time. At the far end of the hall, a doorway leads to the waiting rooms. There are 3 of them, opening one from another in a long sequence. First class, second class, and a third, smaller room, whose classification has worn off its doorplate entirely, leaving only the ghost of letters in the tarnished brass. You stand in the doorway of the first and look in. The room is upholstered in green. That is the first impression and remains the dominant one. Green velvet on the bench seats that run along 3 walls. Green baize on the table at the center. Even the wallpaper above the dado rail running to a pattern of deep green ivy on cream. The ivy, drawn with botanical precision and then repeated until it covers every inch from rail to cornice. The green is faded at the edges of each seat, where the light has reached it longest, but at the back of each cushion, in the places where the light has not gone, the original color persists, a deep, saturated green that suggests a garden in high summer seen through a window, which is perhaps exactly what it was always meant to suggest. In the corner, a clock. A long case clock, a station clock, built for permanence, standing perhaps 6 feet tall in a case of dark walnut, its face cream and steady under a domed glass that has accumulated along its inner edge a fine circle of dust, undisturbed for some time. The hands are at 9:20. You wonder briefly whether this is the correct time or whether the clock stopped once at 9:20 and has maintained that position ever since with the same patient dignity, neither apologizing for having stopped nor feeling any great urgency to resume. You listen. The clock is not ticking, and yet the room is not silent. The room has its own sounds, the sounds of old rooms. A faint creak somewhere in the floor joists as the building's temperature shifts with the morning. The distant, low, continuous hum of the East Hall's iron and glass reaching you through the walls. Somewhere further still, the barely perceptible murmur of the station's mechanical life, the pumps and valves and pressure fittings of the engine yard, conducting their quiet, essential business in the middle distance. You sit briefly on the green velvet. It receives you with a small sigh, the horsehair beneath compressing exactly as far as it ought, and no further. The room does not require anything of you. It has had a great many people sit in it, waiting for a great many trains, carrying a great many different weights of feeling, anticipation and relief, departure and arrival, the particular tension of journeys not yet made, and the particular ease of journeys completed. And it has held all of them with the same equanimity, the same deep green patience, and will go on doing so for as long as there are travelers to sit in it, and perhaps somewhat after. The luggage room is at the station's northern end, reached by a short passage that smells, overwhelmingly and entirely pleasantly, of leather and rope and something mineral that might be the stone floor itself. Old stone that has absorbed decades of weather tracked in from the platform and distilled it into a smell that is purely, specifically, its own. Trunks line the walls on wooden shelving built for exactly this purpose. Broad shelves, widely spaced, each one bearing its load with the solid indifference of good carpentry. But the trunks are of every size and era. A great dome-top thing in black painted wood with brass studs. Its lock, a heavy iron face. A lighter traveling case in pale calfskin. Its corners capped in silver. A monogram stamped on its lid in letters too worn to read. A canvas bag of the military kind. Its grommets green with age. Its straps buckled with a precision suggesting the hands that last fastened them were accustomed to precision. Each one is a held life, not a lost life. Nothing here is lost. The porter said as much, but a life held in abeyance. A life paused between one chapter and the next, its contents folded and clasped, and waiting for the hands that will open the clasps and unfold the contents, and step back into the story at the point where they left it. You pass slowly along the shelves. At the room's far wall, 3 timetables are pinned in a row. They are large sheets of cream paper, printed in the dense, fine type of an earlier age that assumed its readers were patient and their eyesight adequate. Each column headed with a destination, and below it, a long descending list of times: 5:40, 6:15, 7:02, 7:45, 8:20. Each departure its own small act of intention, each arrival its own small act of resolution. Between the columns, the connecting services, shown in smaller type with thin ruled lines drawing the relationships between one journey and the next. The whole thing a kind of map, not of places, but of time, of the shape that movement through the world takes when it is organized and annotated and made legible. You look at them for a long while, not reading them, not planning anything, simply looking, allowing the columns of times to exist in your vision without urgency, without the need to find your name among them or your destination or your hour of departure. Simply the times themselves, their orderly descent, their steady promise that the world continues to move, the trains continue to leave, that between any 2 points on this timetable, there is a journey possible, a route charted, a porter on duty who knows which platform and which track and how long the wait will be. Someone has penciled a small mark beside the 7:02. Just a small mark, a tick or the beginning of a tick, or perhaps something else entirely, a thought that arrived and was noted and was then moved past, leaving only this small carbon trace to say, I was here, and I was thinking about something, and the morning was going on around me. You turn from the timetables. The luggage room breathes its mineral smell around you, patient and unhurried. Outside the narrow window at the room's end, the station yard is visible, a wide expanse of pale gravel and old brick. The engine sheds with their large sliding doors. 2 of the doors open, 1 closed. The morning sun falling across the yard in long shadows that are growing shorter by the minute. The day's slow geometry working itself out overhead with no assistance required. A blackbird lands on the window ledge. It regards you for a moment, head tilted, eye bright, entirely unimpressed, and then lifts and is gone, its departure so quick and clean that it leaves no trace at all. Only the ledge, the window, the yard beyond, and the quiet that was always there. You stand in it. You are in no hurry. The station holds you, as it has always held you, as it holds everything that passes through it, with a patience so complete and so long practiced that it no longer needs to be thought about. It simply is. The iron and the glass and the old stone, and the green velvet rooms, and the brass instruments resting on their polished counter, and the timetables with their columns of times, and the trunks on their shelves, and the clock that stopped at 9:20 and has never needed to explain itself. All of it holding still, all of it here, all of it quietly and entirely yours for as long as you need it. You find him at the counter. He has not heard you come in, or perhaps he has and simply does not require acknowledgement of it, does not need to turn and confirm your presence, because your presence is already fully accommodated, already factored into the room, the way the lamplight is factored in, and the sound of the stove. He stands at the counter's near end with his back to the door, and in his hands is a cloth, soft chamois, the color of old cream, and in front of him on the counter, arranged in a careful row, 6 brass lantern handles. He is polishing. You watch from the doorway for a little while before he knows you are there, because watching a person do a thing they know how to do completely is one of the quieter pleasures available to a patient observer. And you find. Become patient in the way this station makes everyone patient, by simply continuing to be itself and making haste feel unnecessary. His movements are small and even. The cloth moves in circles, not large circles, not effortful ones, but small, precise rotations. The wrist doing most of the work, the elbow barely lifting. He works from the top of each handle downward, the chamois pressing into the curves in the joints, finding the places where tarnish accumulates, and attending to them without fuss, with the matter-of-fact thoroughness of someone who knows that the difference between a well-polished surface and a merely clean one lives in exactly those difficult small places. He reaches the bottom of the third handle, holds it up. The light from the east-facing window reaches it, and the brass gives the light back warmed and deepened. Not the cold glare of new metal, but the richer, rounder gleam of metal that has been attended to many times, that carries in its surface the history of its own maintenance. Each polishing, adding its own infinitesimal layer to a luster that is therefore not just the present morning, but all the mornings before it, accumulated in the brass-like rings in old wood. He sets it down and begins the fourth. "You're welcome to sit," he says, without turning, in the tone of someone who has known for some minutes that you were there and has simply been waiting for a reasonable moment to say so. You sit on the low stool at the counter's corner. "Does it need doing every day?" you ask. "The handles?" He considers this with the serious consideration he gives everything. "Not every day, strictly. Every other day would probably suffice. But every day means it never becomes a large task. Every day means the tarnish never gets a foothold." He turns the fifth handle, finds a small dark patch near the join, addresses it. Most things are like that, I find. The doing of them daily is not about the thing itself so much as about the habit of attention. Attend to something every day and you come to know it very well. And knowing a thing well is its own reward, even if the thing is only a lantern handle. He finishes the fifth, lifts the sixth. When the handles are done and return to their brackets above the door, you watch him do this too, each one lifted and set on its hook with the same care as the polishing. The hook found without looking, the handle seated with a small, satisfying click. He opens the ledger. The rails. The rails in the morning light are remarkable. You had not seen them in daylight, and you stand at the window for a long moment, simply looking. They run from right to left across your field of view in two perfect parallel lines. And the morning sun, still low, still coming in at a long flat angle from somewhere beyond the station's eastern end, catches the tops of them and turns them into something close to silver. Not a dull metallic gleam, but something warmer, something that shifts as you shift your angle of view, a light that seems to come from within the steel rather than being reflected off it. The rails glow with a quiet, steady intensity, like two long and patient thoughts. You dress slowly and go out into the corridor. The smell reaches you before the sound. Something warm and substantial, something with yeast and butter in it, something that says morning in the most fundamental and reassuring of ways. The corridor is bright now, the small high window at its end, admitting a stripe of direct sunlight that lies across the floorboards in a sharp golden rectangle, precise as a letter. And your footsteps on the boards feel different in the morning. Lighter, less like intrusions on silence, and more like participation in the day. The door to the porter's room is open. He is at the small range in the corner. A compact iron stove set into the chimney breast beside the larger coal stove, fitted with a hot plate and a small oven. The kind of arrangement that manages to be both entirely practical and deeply pleasing to look at. His back is to you, but he knows you are there. Without turning, he says, "Good morning," in the same low, even voice as last night, And somehow, it sounds exactly right for the morning too. The voice belonging to both in the way that certain things do. Certain voices, certain rooms. "Good morning," you say. He turns then, briefly, and nods. That same small nod that contains more warmth than most gestures of twice its size. On the counter, 2 plates already wait. There are thick slices of bread, toasted to an even gold and spread with butter that is melted into them, darkening the surfaces slightly in the way that only really good butter on really good bread does. There is a small pot of something deep amber, preserves of some kind, the color of late afternoon light through amber glass. There is a boiled egg in a cup. There is a wedge of yellow cheese. There is, beside each plate, a cup of tea so dark and steady it seems to anchor the whole arrangement. You sit at the counter. You eat slowly, without urgency. The food is simple and it is perfect. Each thing tastes like itself, entirely. The bread like bread, the butter like butter, the tea like the particular comfort of tea on a quiet morning when nowhere needs to be reached. Outside, through the now open window above the counter, the station sounds continue their unhurried morning composition. The distant clang of something metal being moved somewhere in the engine yard. The brief passage of a cart whose wheels find the gap in the platform stones and report it faithfully. The soft coo of the pigeon who lives, apparently, somewhere in the ironwork above platform 2. The night porter, though he is, you suppose, now simply the porter, eats beside you in comfortable silence, his cup held in both hands, his gaze directed somewhere past the window and the platform and the rails, towards some middle distance that seems to satisfy whatever looking he is doing. After breakfast you walk. It seems the natural thing to do, and he seems to expect it. He accompanies you without proposal or discussion, simply falling into step beside you as you pass through the door and onto the platform, his hands settled into the pockets of his coat, his pace matching yours with an ease that suggests long practice. The platform in the morning rewards examination. Against the station wall, 3 luggage trolleys stand in a diagonal row, their iron frames and wooden slatted beds gleaming with the same honest polish as everything else in this station that is tended and used and tended again. On the nearest one, a collection of bags and cases waits in apparent contentment. A large trunk in dark canvas, with leather corners, its brass clasps bright. A hat box in pale gray, with a ribbon tied to its handle. 2 smaller bags in brown leather, fitted close together like old friends on a bench. Around them, on the platform stones, a scatter of mail sacks, thick canvas cinched at the neck with heavy cord. And beside those, a careful stack of parcels. You stop to look at the parcels. There are perhaps a dozen of them, varied in size, each wrapped in brown paper and sealed, some with string, some with red wax, some with both. The wax seals pressed with stamps that have left their impressions in the cooling red. A coat of arms on one, a simple initial on another, something that might be an anchor or a sheaf of wheat on a third. Each parcel is a contained mystery, a held breath, a thing that is on its way from one person to another person across some span of miles in time, carrying inside it whatever it carries. Something needed, something loved, something chosen with care in one place and destined for hands that do not yet know it is coming. Do they all find their way? You ask. He considers this most, he says. The ones that are properly addressed, and the ones that aren't, a small pause. The comfortable pause of someone whose thoughts arrive at their own pace and are the better for it. They wait. Everything that is addressed to somewhere real finds its way there eventually. The station is patient about that. You walk on. The morning light moves with you along the platform, falling through the high-arched windows set into the eastern wall. Windows you had not properly seen last night, their upper portions fitted with stained glass, not elaborate or pictorial, but geometric. The leading, arranged in bold, diamond patterns filled with glass, in amber, rose, and a pale clear green, so that the light coming through them arrives on the platform stones in slow pools of color, each one distinct, amber beside rose beside a green, so delicate it is nearly white. You walk through them one by one, amber light, warm on your face and hands, rose light, softer, gentler, turning the pale stone floor to something almost pink. Green light, cool and clear and very still, the color of early spring. Seen through a window on the first morning, you notice the season has changed. You stop in the green, the porter stops beside you. Around you, the station's morning sounds continue their easy work. A distant engine beginning to stir somewhere in the yard, its boiler pressure building with a low, sustained note that is less a sound than a presence. The light tick of the rails in the growing warmth. Somewhere, a door opening and closing, and the brief exchange of voices too far away to resolve into words, becoming simply the sound of voices, which is its own small comfort. You do this every morning, you say. It is not quite a question. Every morning, he confirms. And it is always like this? He turns to look down the long platform, its length, its light, its patient rows of lamps and benches, and the doors of its small rooms, each one a private arrangement of warmth and quiet. Each one ready. Every station morning, he says, is like every station morning. And yet, a small pause, not quite the same. You look where he looks. The light through the amber window has moved very slightly in the time you have been standing here. The pool of it on the platform stones has shifted a fraction to the left, the edge of it sharpening as the sun climbs, the color deepening at the center where the glass is thickest into something almost golden brown, the color of the inside of a warm loaf. Time is passing. Here, that is simply a thing that is happening, and it is fine. It is more than fine. Time passing in a place like this, on a morning like this, is not loss. It is the way the light moves across the floor, steadily, gently, with no urgency and no grief, turning each moment into the next with the same patient grace that turns the pages of the leather-bound ledgers in the porter's room, the same grace that turns the hands of the brass watches on their shelf, the same grace that will, in its own good time, bring the first train of the day rolling slowly in along the silver rails, its engine sighing, its passengers blinking into the morning with the particular expression of people arriving somewhere they have been looking forward to. But not yet. Not just yet. For now, there is only the platform and the light and the quiet, and the porter standing beside you with his hands in his pockets and his gaze on the middle distance, and the station breathing around both of you, slow, even, unhurried, like something very old and very contented that has found exactly the life it was meant for, and settled into it, and rests. It is the middle of the morning now, and the light through the stained glass windows has climbed to its fullest angle, the colored pools on the platform floor having shortened and brightened as the sun rose, until the amber one has become almost a square, almost orderly, sitting neatly between two flagstones as though it had always been meant to fit there. You have returned to the porter's room. The coal stove has been refreshed. You heard him do it earlier. The soft clunk of the iron door, the settling of new coals, and now it burns with a steady, deep warmth that belongs entirely to mid-morning. Different from last night's warmth, in the way that all familiar things are different when the light changes. Last night the fire was shelter. This morning it is simply a companion, present, reliable, asking nothing. You are in the armchairs again. Your cup is full again, lighter and faintly floral, the steam rising from it in a single fine thread that bends once in some unfelt current and then straightens and climbs until it disappears, as all steam eventually does, into the simpler air above. The porter is quiet for a little while. Not an uncomfortable quiet, the comfortable kind, the kind that has furniture in it, that is full of the small sounds of the stove and the clock in the station breathing around you, that needs no filling because it is already full. Then he says, "I came here when I was 23. He says it without preamble, without deciding to say it, the way some thoughts arrive not as decisions but as weather, gently, inevitably, the natural consequence of the morning and the fire and the particular quality of someone sitting across from you who is content simply to listen. My father had worked the railways," he continues. "Not this station, a larger one, north of here, busier, noisier, the kind of station that never fully sleeps. He worked days mostly. I came here for the nights." He turns his cup slowly in his hands. "I was not, at 23, a person who slept well. I had too much in my head, too many thoughts that wanted to arrive all at once, all talking over each other, the way a large crowd on a platform talks, everyone with somewhere to be, everyone with something important to say. No one listening. A small, comfortable pause. The nights here taught me to listen." You watch the fire through the mica window. The coals have caught fully now, and the light inside the stove is the deep, pulsing amber of something completely committed to what it is doing. "The first year," he says, "I was learning. Everything was learning. The ledgers and the keys, and the way the morning shift leaves things and expects to find them a certain way when they return. The particular sounds of the station at different hours, because the station does not sound the same at midnight as it does at 3 in the morning, and 3 in the morning is entirely different from the hour just before dawn. Each hour has its own quality. You come to know them the way you come to know rooms you have lived in a long time, by feel, in the dark." He leans back. "The travelers taught me too. Every night someone different. Or not different, not exactly. The same in their need, which is what all late-night travelers share. The need to arrive somewhere safely, to be seen by someone, to know that whatever brought them to a railway platform at midnight is not the whole of the story." He pauses, and the clock marks a quiet interval, its tick more felt than heard. "There was a woman I remember from the second winter. This would have been, well, many years ago. She came in on the last train, alone, carrying one small bag, and she sat on the bench at the far end of the platform for a very long time before she came to find me. When she did, she asked only for the time. She had a watch, she knew the time. But that was not what she was asking for, of course. What she was asking for was the simplest thing in the world, to be spoken to gently by someone with no particular agenda." He looks into his cup. We talked for perhaps an hour about the journey she had taken and the one she was about to take, about her sister in the south and the particular smell of her sister's kitchen, which she described with such care and detail that I could very nearly smell it myself. Something with cinnamon, she said. Always. Something with cinnamon and old wood and the lingering smoke from a fire that had been burning since October. She left on the 5:40, and I never saw her again. But I have thought of her kitchen many times since, and of the way she smiled when she described it, as though the describing were a form of arriving. The fire breathes. You find that you, too, are remembering a kitchen. Some warmth, some particular arrangement of light and smell that belongs to a time you cannot precisely locate, but which is entirely real, entirely yours. The trains themselves, he says, moving the way a good story moves, not by direction, but by the natural drift of one memory finding its way to the next. The trains were different then, in those early years. Not better or worse, different. The engines were larger somehow, or perhaps I was smaller then, and the difference in proportion made them seem vast. Standing beside one in the dark, close enough to feel the heat radiating off the boiler, it was like standing beside something that breathed, not like a machine at all, like an animal, enormous and patient, that had agreed for reasons of its own to run on rails and carry people between places, and was at rest now, and tolerating your presence with a large, warm indifference. He smiles at the middle distance. I used to walk the length of them sometimes, on quiet nights when there was nothing else requiring my attention, just walking alongside, one hand not quite touching the iron, feeling the warmth decrease as I moved further from the firebox, forward along the boiler, past the driving wheels, each one taller than me, along the tender, and then into the air beyond the cab, where the cold came back suddenly, definitively. The transition from warmth to cold and back again on those walks was one of the most pleasant sensations I have known. I have never been able to adequately explain why. He does not try to explain it now. He allows it to stand as what it is, something felt, something true, something that needs no explaining to anyone who has ever stood beside a cooling engine in the dark and understood, without words, what the warmth was saying. The room in the morning is the same room and not the same room. The botanical wallpaper, which last night was a dim and dreamy suggestion, is now fully present, a deep ivory ground, patterned with small, carefully drawn ferns and trailing stems, rendered in 2 shades of green that have faded over the decades into something entirely their own. The ceiling is white and high and still. The quilt over you is a patchwork of soft golds and blues and rusts, its pattern now legible. Not diamonds as you had thought last night, but something more varied and interesting. Small squares alternating with 8 pointed stars, each piece a slightly different fabric, a slightly different era, assembled by patient hands into a whole that is greater than any of its parts. You fold it back. The floorboards are cool beneath your feet, but only briefly. The room has enough warmth already, from the radiator and from the morning itself, that the coolness passes within a few steps. You go to the window. The lace curtains are luminous now, the daylight filling every thread of them so that they seem almost aglow, a soft and even radiance that makes the room feel, briefly, underwater in the best way, in the way of warm, shallow water on a bright afternoon. You draw one panel aside. The platform in the morning is a different country from the platform of last night. The night had made it hushed and intimate, a space belonging to stillness and lamplight and slow steam. The morning has returned it to itself. Long and open and clean, the pale stone flags catching the early sun and giving it back with interest, the iron arches overhead throwing their shadows in long diagonals that will move and shorten as the sun climbs. The gas lamps have been extinguished. Someone, at some early hour you did not witness, made their quiet way along the row and turned them down one by one. And their cold iron columns stand simple and elegant in the morning light. No longer needed, entirely comfortable with. The light comes before you are fully awake. It arrives quietly, as morning light in old buildings always does. Not flooding in, not announcing itself, but finding its way through the gaps in the glass, with the patient persistence of something that has been doing this for a very long time and sees no need to make a performance of it. You become aware of it gradually, a warmth on the backs of your eyelids that is different from the lamplight warmth of last night, softer and more diffuse, without edges, a warmth that belongs to the outdoors and has simply agreed, for now, to come inside. You do not move immediately. There is no reason to move immediately. You lie still and let the morning light settle over you the way the quilt settled last night, completely, without asking anything in return. And you listen to the station waking up. The clock on the wall is still ticking, as it was when you fell asleep, as it has been, you understand, through all the dark and quiet hours between. The radiator beneath the window has resumed its companionable ticking too, warming with the morning. Somewhere outside, a sparrow, or something like a sparrow, some small and confident bird with a pin